This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Royal Historical Society. I'm the Director of Communications there. And this is an important event for us. It's a new event for us that we're running in conjunction with the Public History Seminar at the Institute of Historical Research. And I'd like to welcome Lawrence Goldman to formally welcome you to this event.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for holding this inaugural event here at the IHR. And I want to thank Ludmilla and Alex and others for helping to set it up. And I hope we can give you a kind of permanent annual home so that you can come each year and take the pulse of public history in the IHR, which is very much, I think, what the IHR is for. I'm sure many of you have been here before. I'm sure you've attended seminars. Indeed, I'm sure many of you have given seminars at the IHR. And I'm sure you've used our library. If you haven't, here's an opportunity to go upstairs and have a good look round. It's really a library of primary sources. That's how it was set up, and that's what we've continued with. But it's a great place to work, not least peaceful. It's unlike the British Library in that regard, if I may say so. But the academic foundations of the IHR are perhaps worth dwelling on if we're thinking about public history. Because, in fact, you might think, well, this is not a public history institution. It's got a great research library, and it was founded by a man, A.F. Pollard, who was a professor at UCL, very much with a manifesto that historical research in this country was behind many, as it were, historical cultures elsewhere, particularly in Germany and the United States. There wasn't enough primary research. History was rather too much a branch of literature rather than a science in its own right. And Pollard, who was a great Tudor historian, conceived of the idea of a kind of research institute based around seminars, each seminar to have its own little libraries surrounding it, each room to have, as it were, a kind of dedicated purpose in historical research, an English local history room, a modern constitutional history room, a French room. Books would be there, you could pull them off the shelves in the middle of a seminar, and learned academic discourse would result. But one thing that perhaps isn't as well known about Pollard is that as a young man, before he had a formal academic position, he worked on the first Dictionary of National Biography, which was a product of the 1880s and the 1890s. And it was a product not of a university, nor of a university press, unlike the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, which is, of course, very much the product of a university culture. This was a commercial venture by a commercial publisher, George Smith of Smith, Elder and Company, and it was based in Clubland. The actual offices of the original DNB were in St James's, and most of those who wrote for it, like Pollard, did not hold academic positions at all. He was a young man out of Oxford, he needed a job, and he wrote more than 500 articles for the DNB, along with other young men of that era who went on to found our discipline, because other gargantuan contributors to the original DNB included T.F. Tout. Tout was really the founder of the Manchester History Department, and Charles Firth, who became Regius Professor of History at Oxford. Now, some of this may seem a bit arcane and not perhaps forward-thinking, but the point I'm making, and I'm sure you've got it, is that in a way, even at that point when this institute was founded, its foundations, in a sense, are also about public history, because Pollard had come through a period in his career when he'd been very outward-facing, and when he'd been involved in a great project in historical research and writing, which was not a conventional academic project as we would understand it. And in fact, I could add this, that the Oxford DNB, which I was involved with for 10 years, is not itself a purely academic project, even though based in a university and published by a university press. More than a third of our contributors So there are 11,000 contributors to the dictionary. More than a third of them have no formal academic institutional home. They are lone scholars or colleagues and friends of people who appear in the dictionary. And in that sense, it is an outward-facing journal as well, an outward-facing project also. Now, I think, in some ways, you're here on the crest of a wave. Last week, we had the director of Wolf Hall, Peter Kosminski, here for 100 people to question him about the making of Wolf Hall. And I take that to be really a remarkable example of the interest in public history that now exists. Wolf Hall was a huge success. We all watched it last winter. But it was a success not just because two fine novels by Hilary Mantel were turned into television for us. It was a success because people, millions of people, are genuinely interested and fascinated by that period, and indeed many different periods as well. And I mean, the point that I'm making, again, is I think very clear that the grain of events and public interest is very much working in the public realm. History is booming. I don't think there's any grounds for pessimism amongst historians of all types, in the academy and outside, young or old. It is a remarkable fact in this country in the past generation that there has been an academic expansion of our subject, an expansion of our subject at the school level, an expansion in the media. And all of this, I think, feeds well into what I hope will be the IHR's direction, which fits very well with your direction, which is to conserve and maintain its academic base. We have 63 academic seminars, which through the academic year meet here. We have conveners of some of those seminars in the audience, which meet here and which pursue academic history and research as we understand it. But I think that as well as that, we want to turn the Institute inside out and face outwards and draw the public in. And of those 100 or so people who came to our little seminar on Wolf Hall, the majority of them were not, in fact, in the academy. They were people genuinely interested to think about the way you turn history and the novel into television. And it was a very interesting seminar. And with that in mind, we actually managed to establish last year an endowed lectureship in public history. And the second lecture was given only last month. It was given by Dame Helen Ghosh, who's the Director General of the National Trust. And her title, I think, from memory, was More Than Just a Good Day Out, the National Trust and the Public, or something of that nature. And Helen Ghosh entertained us royally with a very fascinating discussion, a serious discussion about how the National Trust interfaces between the public and the academy and presents history accurately and effectively to a mass audience. So I think what I'm saying here is that the IHR and your group are together as one in this particular enterprise. But I want to end by just picking up something of a personal nature, but it will be something that you're very aware of this week, because as you know, we've lost two very notable public historians this week, and you will have seen comment, indeed, the Today programme on Monday morning had two items on the two historians who died over the weekend, Lisa Jardim and David Cesarani. By chance, I suppose, I knew both of them. Lisa Jardim, because she was a fellow of my college when I was an undergraduate, and I would come across her sometimes in the rooms of Norman Stone, who was my director of studies and might be known, at least by reputation, to some of you. Reputation, that's right. But David Cesarani was a personal friend, and there's been a lot of reflection in the past few days, particularly on my circle, his career. And he seemed really to sum up what I think was best about an outward-facing academy, one that engages constantly with the public and sees a responsibility, an obligation to present history in the public realm, but actually enjoys doing that and thinks that actually, and I'm sure this is what David says Irani thought, it was in some ways more satisfying to be involved in mass education than, as it were, simply to revolve ideas with one's colleagues. That has its place, of course. The academy must move forward. But I think David was drawn to public events. He never turned down an invitation, as far as I know, and was enormously effective at developing awareness, historical knowledge of the Holocaust. He was involved in Holocaust education, but more generally in presenting matters of historical import in the public realm in a way that was understandable for a mass audience. He did it very well. He could always be called upon at short notice and always made sense of historical situations and always talked as a commentator about the role that history plays in the current affairs of our own generation. He was, for me, a model of how it's done, and we will miss him greatly. But I do think that if we reflect on those lives, there is, I think, genuine material there for all of us thinking about how we present our subject effectively. And I'm sure you're going to do that today. And I simply want to welcome you today, and I hope every year, to the IHR. I'm sure there are many good things we can do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for that warm welcome. It's a great honour, then, to introduce Professor Pam Cox from the University of Essex. She's a specialist in the field of social history, social policy and criminology. She's well known for two very successful BBC television series, Servants in 2012 and Shop Girls in 2014. And she's currently working on a project on youth justice in the 19th and 20th centuries. But today she's going to talk to us about public audience history. Pam, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Apologies for the interruption of Shop Girls in that opening address. We were just trying to sort the sound out. Well, it's lovely to be here. Always like the IHR. I came to my very first academic conference here, the Anglo-American conference, when I was a PhD student, I think in 1994. And I was at that kind of point, maybe 6 months into the PhD, where I was thinking, I don't know if I really want to do this. And I came to the IHR and I met Heather Shaw and lots of other people, and basically, you know, everything took off after that. And I found a community, basically. I found people to speak to. So I found a history audience, I guess, and I became part of an audience, as an audience of academics. So very important. But today I want to talk about a different kind of public history, even rather different to the kind that Lawrence was talking about, I think. I want to talk about public audience history, as in mass audiences, television audiences, readers of tabloid newspapers, people who might not visit National Trust houses, and so on. And how that meeting that audience perhaps requires a further act of translation. It's one thing to aspire to go on Melvin Bragg and have an article in The Guardian. It's another thing to think about how the viewers of Gogglebox will, or the sofa dwellers of Gogglebox would react to what we do. So, and in that spirit, I've bought not an article for The Guardian that I've written, although I have written articles for The Guardian, but an article for The Sun. When Servants came out in 2012, The Sun asked me to write 1,000 words, and at first I thought, oh my God, you know, what on earth? And anyway, I did it, and they printed it pretty much word for word. I brought a copy of it, so there are about 20 copies, so you can see what The Sun does with public history. I think they did quite a good job, actually. I think it was respectfully treated. The headline was "Historian Reveals the Dark Side of Downton," which was basically the strapline for the whole series anyway, which is why the BBC commissioned it in the first place, so they're not a million miles away from what was actually going on. And the subhead, 100 years ago, 1 in 4 of us would have been servants, and we wouldn't have been very Abbey about it. So, good old Sun headline. So, let me talk about very briefly those two documentaries, Servants from 2012, which was handily been repeated by BBC4 just over the last 3 weeks, the last episode ending last week, and the follow-up Shop Girls. But thinking about the kind of golden rules really for public engagement at that sort of level. Oh, now I'm into finance. What's going on here? There we go. Right. Okay. So this is the trade book that I co-wrote with the producer of Shop Girls, Annabelle Hobley, and it's an interesting project because it was funded by the ESRC as part of their sort of retail initiative, and also part of their impact agenda and training for doctoral training centres. So it was a roundabout way of getting a grant for it. But then in research, I don't think the ESRC were quite expecting it to look quite like that. And I don't know that they were quite expecting that the biggest outlet that took it up in bulk was Asda. And I thought that was fantastic, so that Asda was the Asda and Waterstones, but Asda had that on its supermarket shelf. So that was a trade book written to accompany the series. This is the BBC page on the series, which is still there, and if you want to look at a couple of clips, there are some clips on there. The other one is Servants, which went out, I say, a couple of years ago, and that was based on the work of an enormous number of people, Leonard Davidoff, Lucy Delap, many other people who'd written on servants and done actually a lot more on servants than I had. But what I had done on servants was the book of the PhD, which was about bad girls in Britain. And in a nutshell, my finding in that book was that you think about all the delinquent, wayward, runaway, homeless, defective girls of Britain who were put in various homes around the country. And from 1840 to 1940, they're all trained to be servants. And here's a photograph of them. So in a sense, they're helping to fill the servant shortage gap. So that was my contribution there. That didn't get into Asda, and it hasn't sold nearly as well. So, but the two different kinds of writing. Now, I think I just want to say a quick word about disciplinary advantage, because I think history has a huge advantage over other disciplines, which it doesn't always capitalise on. If you think about the social sciences, I teach in the sociology department, so I'm rather schizophrenic on this matter. But TV news and current affairs, you're going to get more purchase from disciplines like economics, politics, health. You think about elections and economic coverage and so on. So you don't see so many historians being used in those kinds of things. But when it comes to TV features and documentaries, you pick up any broadcast schedule, any night of the week, there'll be a history programme on it. It's a national pastime, it's a national obsession, something like the Chalk Valley History Festival. I don't know if you know about that. Chalk Valley History Festival run by the Daily Mail, sells out every year. And some people think of it as a kind of right-wing version of the Hay Festival, and that's maybe a bit of an issue that public history has this kind of, broadly kind of right-wing, kind of nostalgic, kind of national pride kind of a view. But I don't think it's just that. So I don't think, that also needs some attention. Now, I've got 7 golden rules for doing public history of this kind. And number 1 is to respect the public. And that means recognising where they're coming from, not expecting them to know absolutely anything necessarily about what you're talking about, and not feeling that in explaining a position you're dumbing down. Dumbing down, I think, doesn't really exist for me in this. This is about communication, this is about education. Okay. I think you have to believe in the public value of your research. You don't just do this to get an impact case study. You don't just do this because you need it for a grant output to say what your engagement is. There has to have some real belief in the value of what you're doing. You have to have a strong story to tell, and I think this is where history has a very keen advantage, because it's a narrative form. it's a form of storytelling. Maybe we've resisted that in more recent years, but a return to the narrative for these purposes. For these purposes, you wouldn't necessarily write in the same way for an academic journal, but for this, it's about having a story-driven narrative. This is really important, I think, telling a story in ways that connect with the public. And here I mean connecting with the public at an emotional level. And in questions, perhaps we could talk about that. Is this manipulating the public? Is this playing on emotion and so on? I say yes, it is. It is, and it's doing it for a reason, because all good drama, all good stories, all good narrative has an emotional reach. And we should use that, I think, to our advantage. When I think about the very brief camera training that I had in advance of Servants, and it was with a theatre director, and I wasn't really. Good goodness! Wow, what's happening there?
Because road conditions change in a second.
We've got. Oh, I'll turn that down. I'll turn it down, and when I need it, I'll turn it back up. Yes. So he said to me, so why should you be doing this series? You know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to tell people about my great grandmother's history, and I want to, put them on the map. And he said, yeah, but that's about what you want them to learn. I said, well, yeah, of course, that's what it's about. And he said, no, it's not about what you want them to learn, it's what you want them to feel. At which point I was slightly alarmed and quite British about this. But he said, no, it's absolutely about what you want them to feel. Do you want them to feel curiosity, shame, surprise, shock, sympathy, love? So he said, when you're looking down the black box, what you're thinking is, what you're trying to get an emotional reaction from them, an emotional response, like, did you know this? Can you believe this? Or look at this. It's the way we relate to students. It's the way we relate to a public audience. You want to engage people at the emotional level, and there's no problem with that. I could give you chapter and verse on, the value of empathy in historical study and sociological and social science endeavour, and it could take you down the line that links from Weber and Verstehen and the idea of walking in someone else's shoes, the philosophical idea of alterity, of seeing the world from the position of others. It takes you into R.G. Collingwood, the idea that empathy is the basis of history writing. So there's a huge respectable literature on the effects of mobilising empathy for historical research and indeed social science research. For me, it is really about inviting the audience to walk in the shoes of the people whose lives you're presenting on screen. Not to sympathise with them, but to see the world from their perspective. And that's not easily done, and these devices help you to do that. Other three, much more straightforward, visual storytelling, using images. The Sun got 6 images on here. Obviously TV, visual medium, frames moving absolutely rapidly, as you'll see in the clips. Having a visual, material, auditory kind of approach to storytelling, abandoning the text momentarily. Striking this balance between light and shade, hope and struggle. And this is what commissioners always say. They say, well, okay, this history can be quite grim, especially social history is very grim, it's about poor people's lives, but it can't be too grim because people switch off, at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. That they're there to be entertained as well as informed. And you have to strike a balance between light and shade. Keeping it simple, but building up to complexity, not compromising on complexity, but just working harder to express it in accessible terms. I strongly believe that. Okay, now the story we were telling in Shop Girls was really the story that's encapsulated in this photograph, thinking about the driving narrative of Shop Girls, was really how did the world of shop work become transformed from being the shopkeeper, proprietor, the grocer, the butcher, the pharmacist, the idea of the 19th century shop owner and his world of male apprentices. How did it become a kind of utterly female world? That was basically what we were trying to capture. How did these women get into the frame, and how did they transform shopping and shop culture and consumer culture as a result? So how did they come to be in the frame, and what was the effect of their presence? I quite like this one. It's from that's from the early 20th century. This one is from the 1950s, but it's not much different. This is a Woolworths business annual report. And you've got the women at the front, the shop floor staff, and there's the 2 guys at the top who are the managers. So it's to do with the continuity of that kind of form of labour relations as well. Okay. What I'd like to show you is just the trail that the BBC used for Shop Girls. It's about 20 seconds long. But in 20 seconds, they packed in so much. They had to kind of... The job of that trail was to make people watch it, was to think, oh, yeah, I'll watch that. So it had to do a huge amount of work in 20 seconds and just see how they did it. Now, let's hope I can get this working. Okay, 1 second. No, go back. For a second, right. Okay, do I click on that one?
It needs to be in slide.
Does it? Oh, can you give me a speedy bit of help? Because I can never do this under pressure. Sorry. What do I need to
Just go back into slide view.
Yeah, and then I would double click it, but there's no... Okay, so this is the opening trail, and what they're using is music and image.
But it wouldn't be nothing without a woman on the
From the almost invisible figure to the beating heart of today's vibrant shops.
Shop Girls, the true story of life behind the counter on BBC Two.
So that's very short, but it gives you a sense of it. And the way they moved from that 19th century shop to the boutique, to the department store, you've got the story in 20 seconds. So I guess the challenge is, how would you, with your own research, how would you put the story in a 20-second clip? What images would you use? What would be the big message? And of course that's a compromise, but it's a taster. So I'm very aware I can't stay for the whole day, so I think I'd quite like to leave a lot of room for questions. In terms of, I think I'd just close by saying, let me show you maybe one more clip and then I'll close. Where does that go? Okay. Right, there we go. This one is an interview with workers in Sainsbury's in Southend. I was here in the late 80s when this store opened. I used to work on these checkouts. First time any of us had seen barcodes and scanners, and we all had to be especially trained. I remember there was a prize for Scanner of the Week for the person who could scan the most goods in the shortest time. Don't think I ever won that. This is the audience
today
as well.
Retail workers are still the largest group of private sector workers in the country. Almost 2/3 of them are women, and over half of them work part-time. Vanessa, how long have you worked here?
Just over 24 years, so 24 and a half years.
That's a long time. Yeah. And you've stayed here that long, so yeah.
On and off, so when you say on and off, it's between children.
Yes, of course. How about you, Jeanette? How long have you worked here?
I've worked here 16 years, took 4 years out, and I've been back 8 years.
And when you took 4 out, was that with
looking after my mum? Yeah.
Did you think flexibility is a big part of the attraction of working here?
Definitely, because it helps out when you've got family. You can do things around their school and everything. It was the main reason for me.
And do you think that's why a lot of people work in the big stores like this?
I do, yeah, because there's so many of us. They've got that bit more flexibility.
Now, that clip was just a very short way of trying to say, look at this. Look what's happened to retail today, an army of women, flexible workers who work part-time to fit in around family, but it's letting them tell the story in their words. The audience can draw their own conclusion. Some will think, yeah, that's right, I can see the logic of that. Others will think, here we are, a flexible workforce in all its exploitative form. It was surrounded, that clip, by other things about the rise of part-time work in the Second World War. It had another bit afterwards talking about, is this really the best we can do for retail employers? So you build up the argument in a series of linear steps. So that's what I mean about not compromising on the complexity. You're sort of building up to it, but letting the audience judge at any one point. So in my head, the women in the Sainsbury store there were the people watching the series as well, the people reading, buying the book, the people reading articles and so on, and keeping them in mind at all times was the thing that really, I think drove the sort of style and shape of the programmes. So I'm going to stop there and take some questions, if that's all right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.